Good evening. Welcome to the Board of Selectmen's meeting for August 15, the late summer edition of the Board of Selectmen. We're disclosing, as we do every meeting, that we're being video recorded. And we always start with a moment of appreciation for our troops who are serving around the world. So we'll start with that. Thank you. And then the first thing on our list is citizen comment, but no one signed up.
Have
So
anybody sign up?
action items: vote to sign the September 19, 2017 special state primary warrant.
I will move that we sign the September 19th, 2017 special state primary warrant.
Second?
That's so helpful. Thank you, guys. All those in favor?
Aye. I've actually already signed them, so. Pass it down to you.
Good thing we voted to do that then. DPW Director Maurice Goulet requests the selectmen vote to sign engineering company Vaness Angren Bustlin, Weatherfield, Connecticut, contract for inspecting the paving project on Route 109, added item. Anybody know anything about this? Mike Sullivan. Should we come back to that one?
Let's come back to that.
Pending, discuss Gus Murphy, Selectman Gus Murphy's memo regarding Medfield State Hospital Master Planning Committee guidance and overall goals. Gus, you want
So there's two, I think there's two things there. One is the guidance to the State Hospital Committee. My intention in that draft, what prompted the draft was when Steve Nolan came at the last meeting. I was in attendance at. What part of his comment was, in the absence of direction from the selectmen, we're trying to do what we need to do, and what we think is right. Also, from having attended the State Hospital Master Planning Committee meetings, I know there have been times when they've been headed in directions, began doing what they think maybe is right, and I've asked them point blank, do you know what the selectmen asked you to do? The answer was no. So as I looked at some of, and that's not just because Bill's in the room and John Hardy's in the room, that is not a personal comment on the two of them, that's more comment on that, in what the guidance was. With the special town meeting coming up, and knowing that the committee was on a very tight schedule to get their whole concept pulled together, as I looked at some of the draft agendas they had for meetings, from my standpoint, they were putting some time and effort into things that actually weren't critical. So I drafted this. The intent was to give the committee clear guidance. I was not trying to, make any radical changes to where I think we want the committee to go. And I was definitely not changing or undermining or modifying any of the guidance that the committee first got around the overall objectives that they received in December 2014. So the reason I sent it to the committee first is that we had like a 3-week gap in our meetings. They had at least 2 meetings before our next meeting, which would have been the one I just missed. And I felt it was important to give it to them. I made it clear it was just me at this point speaking, that I didn't think it was totally controversial. But I was not trying to get out in front of you two. It was just that given the overall timing, it seemed like a smart thing to do.
So I guess I would ask what it is that you're seeking to add. The thing that I took away from your work was that you were drawing a line at the special town meeting that their work was over at that point, and that there would be a new committee to do the request.
Assuming their master plan gets approved.
Yeah.
Then there's a new phase of actually having to develop the property. This is me talking, and maybe you both have a different concept, but I don't see this committee being the ones that have the skill set really to be the actual master developers negotiating contracts. And again, it's not a reflection on the people, it's just that that's a different kind of a job to actually carry out and implement some plan. So what I was trying to say is, as of the special town meeting, assuming the plan gets approval, the master planning phase of this thing is done, and there is then a development phase that comes after that.
So, well, let me start at I'd always had this sort of sense that there was a document out there, which is the document that you referenced, the December 14, whatever year it is, 2014. December 17, I'm sorry, 2014, direction to the committee. And that, I don't think actually is the selectmen's direction to the committee. I think that was drafted by one of the committee members as his interpretation of the selectmen's direction. But I went back and looked through my files, and I found a couple earlier drafts of things in June that were a document that was generated in June of that year, and then edited later in June, and I don't know if that was the final direction or not. I mean, it's the same sort of stuff, basically. So that's,
What I can tell you, I guess, from almost 2 years ago into the meetings when I've asked for guidance, the only guidance that's been recognized, and Bill and John confirm, the only guidance that I think the committee recognized it's received is the charter for the master planning committee, which really derives from the points that are made in that December 2014 document. So if there's another document.
There is a matrix that just came out that supposedly,
Bill, could you maybe use the microphone so that people at home can hear? Thank you.
you know, I'm not comfortable speaking for the committee, but since I'm here, I guess. There is I have half of it here basically, and I'll give you a copy of it, but this basically is the consultant's compilation of what the committee thinks the goals that they got from you guys are. And basically it's a matrix that says, you know, take these goals and lay them in against a proposal or an alternative proposal, whatever, and how does it fit these goals and everything else. So if you haven't seen it, I'll give you a
I
copy.
mean, I think it was a very loose sort of direction to the committee, that we just wanted the best possible result for the town.
But they're pretty
Use of the
specific.
land.
These are pretty specific. I mean, I would suggest that you might want to take a look at these. If you think that they're not the right goals or whatever, you might want to comment on those.
I can only assume, again, because just as a background, in going to these meetings, I've had a couple of questions for them. One was, do you guys actually know what the selectmen want you to do? And I think the way you just described the assignment is about the way they kind of say, well, we kind of know what we've been asked to do, but we don't specifically know what we've been asked to do. And
I don't think I would be that vague. I mean, I think, again, it maybe depends on who you're talking to as well, but I mean, the early on meetings were very, very detailed as to going over the charter statement, what did it mean, and they've been working on these, essentially the things that I'll give you for the last, year at least, I mean, in terms of what the objectives are.
well,
And there are things like,
and then the second point that I made, and this ties into the other document, because this is a big piece of property and there are lots of interest and lots of potential uses for the property. One of the pieces of advice I had given that I think maybe the committee accepted because I didn't get pushback, and it sounds like that matrix might even be part of it, is when you go to the town and ask for the town to approve your plan, you'll have a better chance of getting people to approve it if you can describe the benefits of the plan across how it hits and it addresses all of the town goals. If you don't have the ability to do that, then the people who are looking for green space are gonna come in and say, I wanted more green space, I don't like the plan. People that were looking for housing, I wanted more housing, I don't like the plan. But if the committee can paint a picture that says, here's all the goals that the town's trying to achieve that we think this property can address, and here's how we've, moved the ball forward against whatever number of goals we could, that will make a stronger argument for the public to kind of say, okay, now I see what you traded off. So I think what you've done there is a reflection of those goals, but when I pushed them for the goals, in fact, you were even at one of the meetings when I asked this, I didn't mean to be obnoxious, but I asked the question, and what happened is there were no true town goals that were documented, which is what ties into the other document.
Yep. Well, one of the reactions that I had, and one of the earlier drafts that I found today when I was looking for the earlier guidance to the committee, instructed them to bring their proposal back to the selectmen for the approval of the selectmen.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not exactly within the way that they're moving forward at the moment. They're moving forward towards the special town meeting goal. When Steve was here the last time, I suggested to him that I thought it was probably a good time for the selectmen to start meeting with their committee. And I guess I would make that suggestion again, that I think that it probably would be useful, rather than sending them that direction, for us to start having joint meetings with them until the special town meeting.
So there's something, now, again, this direction is not kind of technical. This is, here's what you have to produce for the town meeting. Are you saying that because you think there's something else that they need to produce besides that? I'm mostly worried that they're not, if there's not a clear understanding of what they're producing for the town meeting, and if they try to guess, and if they guess wrong, they're gonna lose time. And as they lose time, they're already pressed, for the time they have to vet this with the public, they're scrambling. I think that's a fair statement. It's a very tight schedule. They're trying to drive a process very quickly, but they're also trying to carve out time to vet this with stakeholders, which I think has already started, and with the public in general through informational meetings, which perhaps will involve some iterations and changes. So I agree with the point about the selectmen meeting with the committee for sure, but I'm just not sure if you're saying you think they need to produce something other than those two things for that special town meeting. Because that was my only point, was to say, here's the two deliverables for the town meeting. Get those things ready for the town meeting, we're good to go. And in all fairness, I'll be at tomorrow's meeting, but I know that there's been discussion in the committee around design guidelines, which is something that perhaps I'm just not smart enough to know is an important thing for the town meeting too, so I'm not fighting that piece of it.
And so the two things that you're talking about are concept plan and a zoning.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's certainly what has to get to the town meeting. It was new to me, the idea of drawing a line and dismissing them after the special town meeting, so I'm not sure about that part of it myself. I haven't thought that through enough, I guess.
So perhaps that's something we should, I don't know, my point was not to say you will be all dismissed. My point was to say the master planning phase of this is done, and we need to then get on with development, and I had kind of assumed that the selectmen would then take a look at that. And I would actually be surprised if all the committee members were dismissed, because some of those committee members were the best real estate developers we had. So if what you read in there was that somehow or another I was planning, or I was suggesting that you'll all be dismissed, it wasn't really that. I was trying to say the master planning phase is done, and now we're gonna get on with development.
Yeah, okay.
But if
Yeah,
there's
'cause that was what
if it
struck
works-
me, that we were gonna start with a new group, and
Yeah,
there was so much institutional historic memory there that I wanted to use. I was hoping that we were gonna keep them actually, so.
well, I do think there's some issues around the skill set you need to develop a piece of property. So I would want to think about that. This isn't a,
So, I mean, if we were to ask if we could join them at their meetings, I mean, there would basically be 9 or 10 meetings that we'd be committing to going to between now and the special town meeting.
in my case, that's not particularly a new commitment, so. Probably been going to 3/4 of the meetings the last
Well,
week.
yeah, and I went up until you started going.
Can I comment?
Sure, Bill?
I just want to point out that if I recall correctly, at one of the, not the last meeting, selectmen's meeting, perhaps the one before that, that the Selectman Marcucci made a statement that said, he wanted to see the plan somewhere, in the, I want to say November, December timeframe, and that we're just placeholding the special town meeting in January based on your satisfaction that the plan that was presented to you was something that would have a chance of passing at town meeting. That's what I understood, and I believe that's what the committee's working to. I might suggest that you give the committee a couple of meetings, because right now they're going through the scenarios and trying to finalize the scenarios and get the cost numbers, whatever that go with it. So, like I said, I would suggest you give them a couple of meetings, and then by all means, jump in both feet if you want.
Yeah, and I think to that point, I mean, if you're done, Pete,
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll weigh in on a couple of these things. Conceptually, I agree with Gus that I think that the master plan, if the plan is adopted, the master planning process is over. I think then the composition of the committee that does the disposition, oversees the disposition plan, is something we'll have to decide then, right? I'm sure there will be committee members who may be done at that point, be pleased to be finished with the process. We may have to add some people depending on additional skill set that we need in that area. So I think it's done, planning is done. If the town adopts a master plan and the town adopts a zoning to do it, there's no more master planning to be done with respect to the hospital. With respect to the joint meetings, I mean, my view is, and this is driven from where I sit on this issue, is that I'm not looking to kind of rejigger or micromanage the plan that the committee is kind of putting forward. So I would actually say, it's fine to have some joint meetings, I wouldn't think we should start going to all of their meetings. I think that could, I mean, they have a process that's working, this is the way it's going. I think if we interject ourselves in a formal way into that process, I'm not sure that's gonna facilitate what they're gonna do. I mean, rather, I mean, I tend to agree with what I said a couple of meetings ago, which is, I think, consistent with, and I didn't give a markup, Gus, to this guidance document, because I don't really have an issue with it, other than to say, I think we may want to provide them a little more meat, right? And this was sort of the point I made at one of the earlier meetings, which is to give them sort of the guardrails with respect to these plans. So the point at which, if the plan doesn't meet, you know, hopefully some small set of criteria, you know, we would strongly consider saying we're not gonna call a town meeting to vote on this plan, because we don't think this is something that ought to be put before the town. Because my view is that if we call a town meeting to put the plan before the town, we have to support the plan that's being put before the town. There's no reason for us to call a meeting to then go and oppose a plan this committee developed. And that's just not a good process. It's not fair to the committee. And so I think we ought to talk about and think about, and I would prefer to give them sort of short and clear guidance on what we want to see, both from a format perspective, as you've done this, but also from a few substantive points that we think the plan has to address. And I think to give some guidance on sort of the level of generality in which we expect to see this plan, right? Do we expect to see an acre by acre plan, a building by building plan, a parcel by parcel plan? Do we want to have sort of in that, I don't know if design guidelines are the right word, but I think we have to provide to the public some sense of sort of the range of possibilities within that master plan, right? That I don't think we can develop a master plan that says, this is what's gonna happen in every parcel of this place. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna tell whichever developer's gonna come along to say, on that 2 acres, it has to be this, and that 7 acres, it has to be that. And then basically saying, we're only gonna have a developer who wants to implement that plan. As opposed to a plan that says, here's the overall concept. You know, we wanna preserve some buildings if we can, we wanna preserve the Lee Chapel, whatever the main principles are, we wanna have this mix, but then expect that developers are gonna come forward in response to the RFP saying, okay, here is my implementation of this master plan. Here's how I think it would work. Here's how we can make it work. And no, I don't think it should go there, you know, because these are the people who will have the most skin in the game, will have the most at risk in putting the plan together. And so I don't think the narrower that range, the less business we're gonna get on this. Right? The more specific the master plan, the less chance we're gonna get anybody who's actually gonna wanna put it into place. Right? You know, the more restrictive it is. And that includes whether, if part of the plan it's gonna be piecemeal, you know, piecemeal disposition, you know, phasing, whatever you call it. But I think we have to should provide some guidance. How specific is this plan to be? And then, sort of on the outer limits, where do we see a real problem if the plan comes back, right? What do we see as the priorities within those particular plans? In terms of, you have all these goals, you have all these different objectives, we'll look at the matrix and see what it says. But within those, what do we see as, look, these should be the main guiding principles, and then leave it to the people who are the experts on this property to say, okay, within that, and I would want to make that guidance, those guardrails pretty wide, in the sense that I'm not looking to second guess what they do. And then they can come back and say, all right, this is generally, that we know as we're working towards this, this is something that's likely to meet the selectmen's approval. We may, you know, tweak it here and there, but then we don't have that. They'll either have us in there kind of as a, we've already got a committee, a resource committee, an extra committee, and now we're gonna have the selectmen also at these meetings. You know, at the end of the day, the 7-member master planning committee has to come forward with a plan that a majority will support. And then that has to be, so else can support, and then, 2/3 of town meeting.
Well, in my case, I've been going to the meetings for almost 2 years, and so I'm intending to continue that.
I'm not telling you, I
Yeah.
think there's a difference
Yeah.
between going to the meetings and then having
Yeah.
a formal joint meeting.
Gotcha, yeah.
The quorum of this board is there, kind of weighing in a formal way.
So Mike, help me, I don't disagree with you in principle, but I'm not sure I understand what you said.
If you did
Yeah.
understand what I said, you might disagree with me.
Well, what I'm getting at is, that when I think about the way that they have their plan developing, and right now, I'm primarily concerned about the campus. The other pieces of property are kind of standalone things, and they know I have issues with one of those pieces of property for sure, possibly even a second one, depending on what the final answer is. On the campus, there are portions of the campus that are designated for housing, perhaps designated for like senior assisted living, certainly the culture areas around, centered on the Lee Chapel, perhaps a commercial, the final plan, right, will be whatever it is, but perhaps the building on the west side is some sort of commercial enterprise. When you're talking about guidelines, I'm guessing you're not talking about having a developer come in and say, no, I think it would be better to put the commercial stuff up here, and we want to move, basically do a complete redo of the master plan. But you might have a developer come in and either say, these 4 buildings that you said we could use, I can't do that. I've already looked at all the rehab costs, and this is not something we should preserve. Or, that you were gonna put 20 units of housing in this building here. I actually think the market would be better off if you put them 10, made them twice as big and charge 3 times as much. So if that's the kind of guideline, if that's the kind of leeway that the fundamental purpose that the master planning committee has designated, but then the practical implementation of that purpose is where the leeway comes in, then I understand what you said. If it was like the developer comes in and gets to rethink the entire site, then I'm not sure why we just spent 3 years on a master plan.
No, I think it's more the latter.
Okay.
But what I'm saying is
The
that.
former.
Yeah, the former.
Okay.
And then, look, if I were doing it from scratch, I would say, be as flexible as possible and let the market figure out what the best use of that is, then a broad set of guidelines. We're past that.
Yeah.
Okay, and so I'm not saying we go back and redo it that way. I think that would probably yield the best result if we were doing it from scratch, to say, look, let somebody who's actually gonna have skin in this game figure all of this out within this broad parameter. That's not where we are.
Right.
But I still think within that, the more specific we are, the harder it's going to be to sell. The harder it's going to be to say, whether it's piece by piece, whether it's collectively. I mean, I'm sure we're doing the best research we can to understand what the market is saying, but the market will only speak when it's actually out there, right? We don't know what the economy is going to be like, we don't know what the credit market is going to be like in July of 2018, and if it's still like it is now, I think pretty much anything would sell, right? Because the market is great. But that's my only point, is that I think the less specific it is on some points, the more flexibility, the more opportunities we'll have to get real interest in this. If you're not saying, this is the kind of building you must build in this spot that does that, and you may have developers, to your point, saying exactly the same thing, well, I don't think that's a good thing to go there, or only one developer thinks that's a good thing to go there, or none, right? When it actually comes time to do it. So that's what I'm talking about from a level of generality.
Realizing that the two of you are not designated spokesmen for this committee, would that kind of parameter be helpful, you think, for the committee?
I think that's kind of where they're going. I mean, the consultant has said, and I've said many times as well, I mean, no plan survives contact with reality. I mean, it will change based on market conditions. I mean, one of the things, as a prime example, is are there going to be historic tax credits when the property goes on the market? I mean, any reuse of the buildings is going to make very heavy use of historic tax credits. If they're gone, it's going to change, the whole, anything that was making use of an old building, I mean, that will have to be re-examined. And I can't say what's going to happen with the rest of the market. I mean, DCAM ran into that problem with the housing market when on the 440 unit plan. I mean, the market fell apart before they could even get started. I mean, that helped explain why they backed away. I mean, there was no market there. So And you will get developers who come back and say, I can't do what you want to do for this many units, I need, more. Or I need, as you said, higher end condos or what have you. So those things will have to be flexible. I mean, I think the committee recognizes that, the consultant certainly does.
So you pull your microphone over you.
No, just,
So that was kind of one point about it, I think. If we could just add a little bit more, and maybe we're not there yet from our own thinking on this, just so that the committee will know if they meet certain criteria, we're very likely to endorse that plan, even if we disagree with specifics of it, if we disagree with parts of it. And I think that ultimately, we're probably all gonna have to support a plan that is not something we would draw if we were a committee of one, doing this together, but that overall is in the best interest of the town, the best that we're likely to do under the overall circumstances. I just don't want it to come as a shock to the committee if they come back with something in November and we say, we can't support this. Right. 'Cause I'll say, I would not, for me, it's a very wide leeway. But I would not vote to send something to the town meeting that I'm not gonna vote for and support.
So let me comment on that, and, because you made a comment 2 meetings ago that said the selectmen should not go into a town meeting where we're against the plan, and I totally agree with that. Bill and John both know that as I thought about that, I have actually deepening concerns about the plan for lot number 3. On sheer logic grounds, I don't have any vested interest in what happens to lot number 3, but I do have some interest, and you guys have heard them, and you know where I'm coming from. I wrote a very specific, and I will share it with you, but I wanted this discussion first, and then I'll be more than happy to show you what I said. I sent a very specific email with a detailed position on where I am on that particular piece of property. The reason I did it was it's 5 months before the town meeting. And I realized that if I have the concern that I have about that, and I agree with you that we should go into that town meeting unified, I needed to give that committee as much time as possible to figure out what to do to either bring me over onto their side or listen to what I'm saying and make an adjustment to their plans. So the only reason I bring that up is if in the back of your mind, there are some things like that that you are sensitive to right now, or Pete, that you are sensitive to right now. It'll actually help them if we do have the committee, not Bill. Bill doesn't need any help. Bill can do this on this. But it would actually help them to be getting that preliminary, I'm not talking about jamming anything down anybody's throat, but getting that on the table sooner rather than later. If, like me, if you have any of those kinds of reservations, I would highly recommend that that conversation take place sooner rather than later. That we don't have to do 9 meetings, but that stuff gets laid on the table sooner rather than later. The point here is to make them successful. Yeah, they gotta get by our scrutiny, but the point here is not to come in at Thanksgiving and go, I don't like this, and then they don't have a prayer. It's really to get this stuff out there now.
That's, I guess, in my thinking, why it made sense to me for us to start sharing with them on an ongoing basis at this point, so that we don't get to a point down the road where there's been divergence. And I guess my inclination is to start going back to their meetings, and so I guess I probably will do that from this point forward.
I have one thought that you can figure out whether, I've been doing it for 2 years, so I've only been a selectman for 4 months, so I have tried not to, till this one email at least, I have tried not to speak as a selectman at these meetings. I've tried to bring my perspective in, and whether this worked or not, I don't know. I think I've been treated about the same for the last several months as before, but I deliberately tried not to be a selectman in the room telling you what I think as a selectman in the room. I've tried to keep my conversations with the committee and my focus on offering advice that will let the committee be successful. Whether they like all of it or not, that's irrelevant, it's that that's the spirit. I have tried very hard not to have it come across as a selectman's message, but rather as just Gus who's been coming for 2 years and still has an interest and is still offering something. So the ones, not that we shouldn't ever have a meeting or a joint meeting, but my advice, I think they're on a bucking bronco as it is. So the tone of those conversations at this early stage should be around understanding of raising questions, not necessarily sending a selectman's voice about what we think you need to do over the month of October, because I don't think it will make your life more pleasant for sure. So if we do that, I mean, I'd encourage either, all of us to come whenever we want to come, but as observers, and if there's something that we can be helpful around advice, to do that. And then if it's important for us to have one meeting where it's kind of a real Board of Selectmen Master Planning Committee touch base meeting, we do that as a recognized event. If that
So
makes sense.
when they came in here and reported to us, I explained to them at that point, and I'll just reiterate it, I went to their meetings from the beginning just to be there to share any information that I had that might be useful to them. Not to be a selectman in the room, as you say, and to try to steer the discussion in any particular way. And so that's why I had all this couple of years worth of material saved up that I shared with Steve when he was here. But I think that we are getting to that point where it may be time for the selectmen to start giving them some feedback on where they are. I mean, I have a little bit of catching up to do in terms, I mean, I see their minutes and those things, but I haven't been to the meetings now for several months. So for me, I need to get caught up as to where they are. I'm very curious about the financials.
So are they.
That's why I suggest you, at least give it a meeting or two before you, because there's nothing to look at right now. I mean, we're just fighting through the finalization of what the scenario looks like, and then the numbers are due, I think, in a couple of days. I mean, and they need to be vetted before you do anything with the numbers. I wouldn't want to show them to you until they've been reviewed.
So then what do we want to do with this Gus Murray, Selectman Murray
So
missive?
there's, Mike, the guidance that would you be comfortable drafting the addition to that statement that would capture what you're getting at there?
Sure.
So I would think, they've already seen what I wrote. I think what we're hearing today in terms of what the committee would take away tomorrow is that we are, I think we're comfortable with what this thing says. It's just that we would like to work on adding a little bit more around these guardrails it's actually to provide more guidance than this thing has. So we're still gonna work on it before we finalize it and have it be a statement from the board.
Yeah, and I think, I'm happy to do that. Did you get any feedback from the committee on this document?
No pushback from it. Steve Nolan quite understandably said, that, thanks for sending me what you sent. I think what we'll do is we will wait until we've actually gotten the answer from the board before we respond to it. I thought that was totally reasonable. I told him I didn't think it would be controversial, but nonetheless, you're trying to be a chair of a meeting and one selectman sends you a statement, and you know that you could get 2 more statements from the other 2 selectmen. He basically isn't gonna jump at shadows, and that, I wanted him to kind of see it, because I didn't think it was being too controversial, but it was totally reasonable to me that he said, well, Gus, thanks, I appreciate seeing it, but I'm gonna wait until I actually hear that this is what the board wants.
So why don't we have Mike do his revision?
Sure.
And we'll
I guess what I was
look at it.
curious about was whether they thought it was helpful or not. And that was kind of the sense of, is if we want to be helpful, then I think we ought to provide guidance on the topics and at a level of generality that's going to be helpful to them, right? And so, if the response was, and I guess we don't have to have a response, right? If the response was, this is what we need, this is the sort of guidance that we're looking for, this is helpful to us, then that would certainly incline, because I don't disagree with anything.
So let me talk a little more turkey on why I wrote what I wrote the way I wrote it. In the two draft agendas that I saw for the committee right after the follow-up meeting at the Selectmen's meeting that I was at, both draft agendas were devoting a significant amount of time to writing RFPs for lot number 3 in the Hinckley Farm. I personally think that an inordinate amount of time and attention has been placed on what to do with those 2 undeveloped lots relative to the complexity of the campus. But as I saw those two things showing up on both agendas, I said, don't put time into writing an RFP, you don't have that much time. Put time into getting this concept out and getting the zoning changed. That's what the vote at the special town meeting will be. So I didn't hear back from Steve about this was helpful, Gus, but what I did get back from Steve was an explanation for why the committee felt that it needed to move quickly with the RFP, and it was a reaction to the issue that you first raised and that you and I reviewed about, okay, we've got your recommendation for lot number 3, Hinckley Farm, let's pull those off your plate. It's still not clear to me how these things are strategically integrated with the rest of the stuff in terms of what needs to go there, but because they recognized that there was this thought process of possibly pulling them back, they felt like they needed to pull something together very quickly to tie up all in a package, which to me is a total waste of time. So my purpose here was, in a subtle way, to say, don't take time doing RFPs for something when there's a more fundamental issue there. Steve's response was one that suggested to me they were doing that actually out of a reaction to the issue that got brought up here at the Selectmen's meeting about whether or not to pull it back. And I think the agendas that I've seen since have that thing back off the plate, and we're back focused on, this is complex, it's not an easy overall concept to put together. I think that's where we're back to, so far as I know.
So just to back up as to why Lot 3 and Hinckley got added onto that is because they're just physically contiguous through McCarthy Park up to the hospital property. And the selectmen at the time thought that it made the most sense to have a plan for all of the contiguously adjacent town-owned land. I mean, I know that part of my thought at the time was that McCarthy Park might have been a good site for doing some building, and you might replicate the field somewhere else. They looked at that, they decided that was too expensive.
Actually, Pete, that's not the story I've gotten. I called Richard DeSorder, and I asked him, I said, what possibly were you thinking of, because I respect him. And I said, why did you all decide to transfer this up to the State Hospital Master Planning Committee? And the short answer was because when we were supposed to meet to review the proposal that Borelli had just before the meeting, he withdrew the proposal. So we were sitting there with no commercial proposal, and we went along with it. So I think the rationale for asking for
Well,
it,
that certainly wasn't my thinking. I think it was
wasn't
because
quite
it made more
that
sense to
cavalier
plan
statement.
for the whole parcel.
I
I
had a
read
lengthy
Richard's-
discussion with the selectmen who voted.
I read Richard's email too. It wasn't quite that cavalier a decision. I mean, I don't think he transmitted it quite that way either. But I've been in every one of these meetings, and I was here when the charter was given to include those 2 pieces of property, and it was based on the contiguousness. And if you read the charter, it says essentially to do that. I mean, so
Well, it's neither here nor there now.
it isn't. So I.
Right, I mean, on that point, and I'm glad to hear that it's not, because it didn't sound like from those meetings that it was gonna consume any extra time to do it. It sounded like keeping it with the committee would have been efficient and just sort of moved along with the rest of the process, so.
That's the committee's position still, I think.
Yeah, and so I'm glad that they, I guess, sort of listened to what we said, but I certainly didn't think it was something that needed immediate action because it's gonna be folded in on a regular timeline of everything else. And I would think that would be the easiest RFP to write, given that they basically decided what they want it to be. And surely the consultant can write an RFP for 2 relatively simple developments. And that's good.
Well, and that's where my reservation.
I understand, but putting this just from an allocation of their time.
Yep.
So I'll take a crack at adding, I think it will mostly be sort of in bullet points, right?
Mhm.
There's nothing I've heard or read in any of the materials that suggest, the only thing that had come up over the years that was a real deal breaker for me, which I think is now completely off the table, is the idea that you were gonna sell town land and invest cash back into the core campus to facilitate the end game. That, to me, I would never support that. To me, it's just and it sounds like from what Steve said, that's off the table. And so, if that's off the table, then that's the only thing that I've heard within the last year that would be, I have a real problem with.
Can I though offer something which I think you'll agree with for purposes of the committee? I think the committee, when they were trying to do that, was trying to find a way to at least partially self-fund the infrastructure costs that they knew would be associated with this. So the idea that the revenue that comes in from the sale of any land is off the table to go into some sort of a virtual pot for the state hospital property in no way says that when the state hospital, whether it's the development committee or the master planning committee comes in and says we will need X millions of dollars of infrastructure investment by the town for these sound business reasons, that's a legitimate thing to come in as a cost to the town. So it's not like you have to run bake sales to pay for the sewers and the water pipes.
Right.
It's just, you don't have to worry about the financing side of it.
And-
You just gotta come up with.
And the share ratio plays into that as
Yes.
well with, investment, where do you get the best bang for your buck in terms of who makes the investment? Is it a developer, is it a town? But that is something that will be presented when you come to that particular situation.
Right. And I think that's a totally different issue. If you have a developer on the table saying, hey, I'm gonna spend $15 million to buy this property, you need to pay $3 million to put a road in, then obviously that's probably a good reason to do it, and you figure out the best way to finance it.
Right.
I think it's unlikely that that's gonna be the math. And so my concern would be if what we're gonna do to sort of sweeten the pot for our preferred outcome that may not be an economical outcome, is we'll take some money and put it into these buildings or put it into this, and then that'll make it a little nicer for the developer to come in and do what we want.
Yeah.
That, I think, is not, to me, a good idea. I mean, it's just, or for us to build a road without a signed agreement with the developer to build it and all of that, in the hopes that if you build it, they will come. That to me is what I'm opposed to. It doesn't sound like that's even, even on the table.
It's not on the table unless somebody were to come back and you could do a financial analysis that showed that there was an advantage to do that. I mean, if a developer hidden in his numbers has got $20 million in there for infrastructure and the town can do it for $3 million or whatever, you just essentially increase the return you're going to get on the property. So it's all dependent on a particular circumstance and what the particular numbers say at the time.
Right.
Also, what can you get for finance? Can you get financing from the state for something? What's the bond rate? So, I mean, it's at this particular time, I think the trick is to try to leave as many doors open as possible and do the math when you're at that situation.
But then you're at the point of having a signed agreement and having somebody who's coming in and saying that if, you'll do this as part of, after my check clears, then you're gonna do this as part of this, as opposed to saying, we're gonna do this, and then, in phase 4, this will make phase 4 more attractive, because in phase 2, we sold lot 3 of the Hinckley property and poured $3 million into building a road, in the hopes that in phase 4, we're now gonna have something that we like there, because the road is.
You don't disagree with that?
Yeah, and I think that's off the table. I think that idea, to me, that was the only thing that's come across the transom in the last year or two that I've really had an issue with. Other than that, as I say, I don't have strong specific views about what ought to go anywhere, other than to say it ought to be fiscally responsible and, look nice and overall not cause harm to the town. Within that relatively easy to meet standard, I'm probably the easiest one of the three of us to convince about.
All right, so that you'll revise Gus's
Yes, I will.
piece, and then we'll move on now to Gus's other piece, which is the long-term, short-term goals for the town, which
Yep.
Mike and I both responded to.
Yes. Pete, I haven't totally gone through yours, I did print them out. Mike, I did go through yours, if I can find which one I'm looking for. I'm gonna get a bigger notebook. 4 months. This one's running out.
So I guess I would just start out while you're getting your things out. I read your work product as more like a mission statement. I was thinking more in terms of a list of tasks for the town, for the selectmen to accomplish, so that your thing came across as a very different sort of piece than I was thinking of as a checklist.
Right, for a reason though. It was to explain what the real goal was, not just what the actions were. I thought, let me start, because I spent more time with Mike's, because I just got yours just before I came here. I thought what you tried to do, Mike, the way I would look at it as a consultant is I laid out strategic objectives. You actually mapped in the long-term goals, and one of the questions I had was, you made them quantified, so I made them concrete, we can measure them whether we're making progress. I'm totally on board with that. The one question that we probably think about is whether the time frame of those goals is a 3 to 5 year goal or a 5 to 10 year goal.
That's why I said long-term and not, and
Yeah.
not specific, because I don't really know.
Right. Structurally, structurally, I would leave the short-term stuff out of this document, because what I would see is once we have this document done, we might come back to this from those long-term goals to look once a year at how we're doing against those long-term goals. But I don't think this is a document that changes very much, very frequently, where our annual goals would be a document that we would probably revise every year. So I liked your short-term goals. It was a mechanical thing that said I would actually move those to a separate document, which actually, one of the things that Mike did is he both advanced the finalization of the goals, I think, and he also got us started on the annual goals, which is what you were interested in.
We
So,
move all of
yeah,
this.
I thought it pushed the whole thing forward.
Well, yeah, because you created an annual goal for
Right.
this year.
And mostly, I mean, it was, the specific goals are mostly not there for this. I mean, I think they're all fine goals, but
Mhm.
mostly to show, as again, sort of how specific I think they ought to be. 'Cause my only concern with, I had no objection to sort of both the mission statement aspect of it.
Mhm.
I just think if the purpose of this is to give guidance to other town boards and committees, I think it's gotta be more specific than what you have. Because I think you could, at any committee with this set of goals, the ones that you wrote, you could spend the whole time debating what a proper balance is between the funding of important town services and affordability for taxpayers, right?
Mhm.
That's, I mean, and you probably, most people would agree with that statement, right? Nobody's gonna say we should have an imbalance between it. But you could have a great debate between what people think is the proper balance, what they think the proper level of funding is, what they think, affordability for taxpayers is, right?
Mhm.
My perspective on what's affordable for taxpayers and might be a lot different than somebody else, right? Somebody else might say the taxes are already way too high, right? So we're already at the level of affordability.
Mhm.
Other people might say, well, we got plenty more
Mhm.
where that came from, right? So I thought to be useful as both as a measuring stick for us, but also as useful guidance for other committees to measure what they're doing. It ought to be more specific in the long-term goals. And again, it can be a little less specific than what I have,
Mhm.
but something that you can point to and say it either meets this test or it doesn't meet this test, as opposed to debating whether committee one thinks we've struck the proper balance between funding of important town services and affordability at one level, and committee two thinks they've struck the proper balance between those two things, and they're disconnected, right? Or they each think they've struck the proper balance within their narrow area, and then collectively, it's imbalanced. Because they're striking it in favor of whatever it is.
Yeah, on that goal, I had a more modest objective, which was simply to make sure we had a conversation about affordability for the taxpayer, and not merely what's needed, which sometimes it's more of a discussion on what's needed. I think that my suggestion here, given that you sent yours and Pete, you sent yours, might be that I could actually react to the two of yours in a consolidated one with comments. Because a lot of my comments to yours, Mike, had to do with either mechanical issues. I'll give you an example. When you say fully fund OPEB, I won't get into a tutorial on what constitutes fully funding OPEB. I know it sounds easy, except that the way that the calculations are made about how we fall short, if you're fully funded, it uses a more liberal view of projecting returns, and it allows you to use a 30-year time frame. If you're not, every year it takes another year off the time frame. So when we see what our unfunded liabilities are, or our shortfalls against an annual retired contribution, that's measured with an actuary who's both assuming a lower return on investment than if we were actually on schedule, and it's measured with a 22-year time frame to get all the way closed up versus 30-year. So when you're deciding what constitutes doing what you need to do to fully fund OPEB, quite aside from the political discussions that Mike and I have had around the big picture on what happens if you're the only one who gets things fixed and then the state comes in and starts helping people out, it's a little more complex question. It's just a question of figuring out how to answer it for our purposes. There was one minor one. You took out the maintain, one of mine, I had three. What I actually saw, Mike, was that your specifics could easily, in most cases, be mapped onto my 3 bullets. And you could literally just take the bullet and then put your concrete specific associated with that bullet. And basically what we've done is we've set up metrics, so I could see a way we can get there. The only one that you took out on mine, that first one, maintain a responsible, fiscally prudent financial position. Let me put that a different way, maintain our bond rating. That's what I was saying.
I like that better.
Okay.
Because everybody
Okay.
thinks we should have a responsible fiscally
Yeah.
prudent financial position,
Yeah.
and then, people think it's
Yeah.
one thing or the other, right?
So that was, anyway, that was what was behind that one.
Yeah, no, that's good for me. And the other, and again, I didn't want to split this out into different categories. There is, in this first section of managing town finances, there's sort of a mix between 2 different things, right? There's what we're doing to promote commercial development and reduce the tax burden from a development standpoint. And then there's also sort of the management of town finances, right? And I think they probably, I don't know if it would be the 6th category, but they are 2 different things.
Yeah, and this one does tie into one of Pete's comments. Pete was making the case that in addition to commercial development, revenue positive housing developments are also attractive. I'm perfectly comfortable adding that as another strategy. I would make the observation that chances are those point you in the direction of building premium housing. So it's what it, we're not going to industrialize the town, and we're not going to, I hope, turn Medfield into Beverly Hills East. So it's kind of like.
Or its density. I mean,
Or its density, yeah.
Because the number of school children per
Yeah.
unit drops by a factor of 10 if you join the structures together.
But that also then, I'm agreeing with that as a strategy, but again, you gotta be thoughtful about that unless you really do wanna create multi-family housing on more and more lots here in town. So it's a balance issue, but I was okay with that. There was one that you had, Mike, under the short term, under that first one. Number 2, identify one parcel of land not town-owned that is zoned residential, which would be appropriate for commercial development. The only part I didn't follow on that is, so are you saying unilaterally rezone private land, or?
No, it would be land that would be vacant, or land that that we think overall is not currently being used. I mean, obviously, you don't have to rezone a house that somebody's living in as commercial in
Yeah,
town,
but if
just kind of looking at it as the change, whatever some of these zoning districts are done, the economy has changed, the kinds of areas that would be useful commercial have changed.
I think that we really need to do that with regard to the downtown, because we have an issue of not enough critical mass of retail and space in the downtown. And I think there's probably greater demand for retail space than we have. And I would ask to look at whether we should be enlarging the business district in the downtown to get that critical mass.
Because you said not town-owned, I was trying to understand whether we're rezoning private land, whether we're acquiring private land that's not used, or, this is downstream, we can talk about that. That was just something I
It's
did.
along the lines too of what Pete suggested,
Okay.
let's look again at how things are zoned.
Yep.
Are there parcels of land that should be zoned differently for the long
Okay.
term? Obviously, anything that's there now
Yeah.
won't change just because
Okay.
we zoned it, but let's say in the future, we think, that when that house is sold, maybe it should be sold to somebody who's going to.
For instance, Randy's gas station on Route 27 is on residentially zoned land. That doesn't make a lot of sense.
Okay. The other stuff that I had were like, they were at that level of specificity that I think I could capture in comments, and rather than taking time in a meeting, if they just simply did that and sent it out to all of you. I think we're on the right track. What I took from this, from I think both of you, is that the basic structure of those 5 key areas was fine.
Yep.
I think your interest mostly, Pete, has been in the act, what are we gonna get done this year? So
Yes,
this
a
actually
list that we
got us-
can be measured
yeah,
against.
this got us there farther in that direction than I actually expected we were gonna get tonight, so.
And then the last thing that I put on there, which I didn't populate at all,
Yeah,
was
what
the
was
current order of priority, right? That at some point, when you have these goals, they can't all be weighed equally. And so that if the idea is that we're gonna give guidance to other committees on what we're gonna be doing over the long term, things that they need to know that are gonna be happening, that are gonna affect what they're gonna do, I think we have to say, at some level, right now, these are our priorities.
So I didn't understand that comment. I might understand that in terms of like specific actions. For instance,
Some of the
in
more
terms of
important than
priorities, commercial development in town is of secondary importance to keeping safe harbor for 40B. I get it at that level, but at the level of the goals, they're not competing goals.
I agree with you. No, it was not at the level of
Okay.
the top of the boxes. Because again, you can't act, you can be guided by those things, but there's nothing to act against, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like
Okay.
you're saying, well, we're not
Yeah.
prioritizing preserving the historic character, but we can say, look, in the short term, taking affirmative steps to preserve certain historic buildings is gonna be less of a priority than promoting commercial development. So when those two things are at odds in terms of the competition for public money,
Yeah.
where we are right now, one is gonna win out over the other as a general matter, because that's what we think is most important.
Okay, so let me offer to try to take your 2 inputs, to synthesize those into the next iteration of this thing.
Excellent, this is
And
working out
then-
really well, I have
and
no
then-
assignments.
Oh, there's harder things coming.
So,
Okay.
if we're all set there then?
Yep, we're all set.
Veteran Service Officer, Mike?
Yes, we have received 3 applications for veteran service officer, and we're going to schedule interviews with them at the personnel board so that they can screen the candidates and come up with recommendations. There were also some indications that there are other towns in the area that may be in a similar situation, and we thought we'd try to contact them to see if there might be any common solutions that we could come up with them. So,
Mike, were you ever able to set up a meeting with Dale Kurtz?
with what?
Dale Kurtz, Norfolk, out of the county?
No, I haven't. I can do that if you'd like.
So, I'll offer the same thing to you. I thought originally you were in 2 meetings ago when we talked about, I thought you were gonna try to, not trying to force you to do that.
No.
But if, on the other hand, also, if you would like me to do that, only because I know Dale, if that helps, I can do that if you want me to.
Yeah, I think it'd be very helpful.
Okay.
Anything that will help us resolve this issue. certainly.
I wasn't sure that he's free, that we had enough, okay.
So, Veteran Service Officer to be heard about later. Draft copy, Mr.
Yeah.
Griffin.
Also at that meeting, you brought up Walpole, and you were gonna check with Walpole and see if they were interested. Is there any follow-up with that?
I did speak with Local, I haven't heard anything back yet, so I'll try to get a hold of them and see if there is any interest.
Okay, thank
And
you.
and then one question, so on these 3 resumes, Mike, we've received them, have you had any interaction, or?
I've talked to all 3,
Okay.
and I've got a preliminary,
Are they all viable candidates, or are they?
if in different ways they are viable, yeah. There's one of them I think there might be a problem with, and he was more interested in working nights and weekends.
Well,
So I think that could be a problem, so I'm not sure he'd be, unless he could reschedule his work.
okay. So I guess the question I'm really asking is, you have 3 candidates here. We're not yet satisfied that we have enough candidates to get serious about making a decision.
The more the better. Chris did send out a letter to, she went through the list of veterans in town that and sort of did a screening
Okay.
of those she thought might be interested to see if there was any indication. So,
Okay.
Yes, Mr. Rhodes.
Are the applicants that you're receiving, are they for the full-time position or a part-time position?
Two were looking for part-time, and one was looking for part-time with other duties to make it full-time.
So, but you haven't decided on whether to go forward with full-time or part-time, or even the sharing the veteran service stuff. You haven't really made that decision yet, I believe, right?
Right, we have to see what's available and what their qualifications are before we make a final decision along those lines.
So how does the general community know that the position is open?
It's been discussed at the meetings,
Who's the general community you're talking about?
yes, we've sent.
Massachusetts, citizens of Massachusetts?
Veterans of that?
We can.
In this case, veterans of Massachusetts.
We can send it out statewide with the advertisement. It was my understanding, especially when the Legion was here, that they were looking for somebody who was a lot more local than finding a statewide person. But I'm more than welcome, I'm more than happy to advertise it on a statewide basis.
I think everybody prefers local, without question, but part of the meeting, I thought, was, in finding all the qualifications that you wanted, that you probably have to widen the search to get those qualified candidates.
It certainly makes sense to me that we should
Sure.
include a wider net.
So Ron, let me talk candidly about this issue in light of our earlier conversations, and I want your reaction to this. There's a legal requirement that we hire a full-time person. With a veiled threat that if we don't, perhaps the state won't, give us the passwords or give us the money, all this. And the thing that I wrestle with is if one of these three, at least one of them looked like a really good candidate to do this. If that person wanted to be part-time, I've played this hypothetical out in my head that says, if we found the ideal VSO who wanted to be a part-time VSO with all the skill, that actually doesn't even need to come up the learning curve because they already have it. They already have the shine training. Would we hire them part-time because that's what they wanted? And then see if the state wants to say, no, we don't care. You don't give vet benefits and you don't take care of your veterans because you don't have a full-time, or do we turn that guy down in order to get a full-time person? This is sincere. I played this out and I'm wrestling with it.
So let me answer it this way. Currently, for the last 6 years, the town of Medfield has not been in compliance with the state law. Going forward now, I think it would look as though we were going in defiance of state law. And I think that carries a much heavier weight that you purposely went forward and defied the state law. When you walked into the, 6 years ago, when you walked into the population increase, you kind of walked into that. It was just the population increase and you went over, you could see it coming perhaps, but you just walked into it. But now you're not walking into it, you're walking against it.
So your assessment would be that the veterans organizations at the state level would place a greater priority on us complying with state law than we're providing benefits to veterans.
I'm perhaps suggesting that your fellow selectmen who are attorneys cannot go in defiance of state law.
That's a pretty weaselly answer, Ron. I'm not an attorney, I don't.
Well, how can they? So, I think we have to find something that makes everybody happy.
So let me tell you why I'm asking that question, because this is not purely a matter of law. This is partly a matter of politics. Politics is something I understand a little bit about. The letter that came through said if you don't comply, we may not support your reimbursement. It didn't say you're in violation and we definitely won't. It actually, smart wording. Because if we did, I mean, there's one guy in here that I looked and said if he passes, all the other tests, this guy has skills, and I just didn't know whether he wanted a full-time job or a part-time job. And so that's why I went through, because I said it would be a real shame on paper to turn this guy down just because he wants a part-time job. Because it looks like he could be pretty good. So that's what led me down the path, and that's why I'm putting you on the spot with a question here. You see what I'm saying? What's the most important thing? Is it actually getting benefits to the veterans if it happened? Or do we just keep waiting until we find the person that we can actually craft and have fill a full-time job?
So I guess I can't answer that, but
That's
you know,
okay.
obviously in my term here, I have always thought that providing the benefits to the veteran was foremost in my mind, foremost in my heart. I think I lived up to that example. So I wish that for the next person as well. But I'd like to be in compliance with the state law. I'm very uncomfortable, with being not in compliance with the law, regardless of what the penalties are.
The penalties, I believe, are you forfeit your 75% reimbursement from the state under the section 115. That's my understanding from town council. And that would be about $15,000. And you would lose that insurance.
In fact, I think, I calculated those numbers for you, so yes, I agree with them.
Yeah. The cost of going from part-time to full-time would probably equal or exceed that.
But the reason to go to the full-time is also to make use of that person to do other things for the town.
If we have things that need to be done, not just to hire a person because
Right.
we need to comply with the law.
And we've been told by Medfield Youth Outreach, Council on Aging, and Veteran Services that there is things that,
As long as it increases their staffing, it
So
doesn't.
they'll take free labor.
Yes.
right, well, it's more than just free labor. They've told us that there are things that can be done, that should be done.
Every department will tell you that. We have 2 full-time social
All right,
workers
well,
in outreach.
we have to rely on you and Chris to tell us
Social
what's
worker and the
what's
council
real
on
and what's
aging.
not real.
I don't know how many social workers and adjustment counselors and psychologists we have in school departments. So
Yeah.
I don't think we have any shortage of counselors.
Ron, there was one other thought that I had on this one. And what I did is I went back and looked at the video from 2 meetings ago. I listened to the guy from Arlington again. If we had a disabled veteran who was able to do the job, now I don't know that we'd find one, but what I'm getting at is a disabled veteran who's maybe not somebody who would work full-time, would want to work full-time, is disabled, but was capable of doing the job, and obviously would be motivated to do the job and would understand the system. It seems to me there's a possibility, if that kind of a person came along, it seems to me there's a possibility that the state would be a lot more flexible around what we do if we found that kind of a person who could do the job. I just wondered whether you've had any experience or any, ever seen that happen, because it was something that triggered when I watched the video again. Talk about VA benefits and stuff like that.
So I don't know how the state would behave. However, I will say that the state has the same objective that everybody has, is to ensure that the veterans in town get the services and the adequate counseling that they need. That is still their goal. And if you are providing that, I think that's why they were quiet for 6 years while I was providing it. I think that is their goal.
Okay.
But I don't think they'll go on record and say that, but.
Well, I was just looking for alternatives, and that one popped in my head. It's another way we might crack this nut.
Next item on our list is the draft copy of Selectmen annual calendar, and Mike has updated that. Mike, when you do that, can you just email us copies? Can you just circulate it so that we have copies?
Sure, I think you have copies in your folder, if you have copies.
Yeah, came through in
For the calendar. Yep,
In
It's in
the
the
supplemental.
pending,
yeah.
Yeah,
it's in the pending folder.
yeah.
Oh.
There are a couple of things.
Well, there's
that
one
is-
there, I never know whether that's for me or whether that's for someone else, so I just left it.
There are a couple of things I just want to bring your attention and just get your thoughts on. One of them is, you'll notice, I have a meeting scheduled for the August 29th. That would be a third meeting in August. The reason I did that is if you look at the September, I have September 5 or 12 and September 19 or 26. September 5th is the day after Labor Day. And it's one when, you know, the schools are back in session. It's, everybody's just back in town, and it's not the easiest day to, so I thought perhaps instead of meeting on the 5th, if you wanted to meet on the 29th, which is 2 weeks from tonight instead, and then go to the, instead of the 1st and 3rd for September, go to the 2nd and 4th, and then in October go back to the 1st and 3rd schedule. I don't know how that works out for you, but it's
And
just.
for me, I've already booked,
Yeah, we already booked something on the 5th because of the meeting.
yeah, and I already booked travel on the 2nd and 4th Tuesdays to work around our schedule. So you can do the meeting, I won't be here on the 26th or on the 12th. So,
Okay,
because I
you
blocked
will
my
you will be
schedule.
available on the 5th
The
then?
5th and the 19th, the 1st and 3rd is in my calendar.
Okay, then we'll stick with that schedule. The other thing is, I did have a request from Park and Rec. They said that their consultant's report was coming in, and they would like to bring their consultant to meet with the board to discuss their report. This was the one that was funded by town meeting a year and a half ago. And they'd like to come in September so they could get going on their plan. So I suggested either so it would be either the 5th or the 19th, whatever year. Why don't I offer them both and then see which one they would consider.
Okay,
And if necessary, we would switch some of the other things around. And if there's any other suggestions as to things you would like to see on there, I did also change the date of the special town meeting, although that wasn't meant to be a firm date, it was just to throw out. To be, the further out you go, the less specific things are, but I now have it as January 8th for the special town meeting. That will require, by the way, that all the planning board hearings be held and advertised and held prior to that, because that's a requirement of state statute. And anything else on there that you think I left out or shouldn't be in there, or you'd like to see changed, just email me and let me know.
so what, Mike, what I would suggest is if you put a date in the upper right-hand corner as to the date you're doing them, because and then use this as an evergreen document, just keep revising it with a fresh date,
Sure.
and then email us a copy every time you revise it,
Okay.
so that we have a current one to work off of. But that's great, thank you for doing that. Anything else on the calendar? Discuss request for meeting with developers of Dale Street proposed project.
Yeah,
Can we just go back to that, so we are gonna meet on the 29th?
No,
no, we're not.
We're not.
15, 19.
Okay,
You were not available on the 29th.
well, I'm available on the
Oh, on
29th.
the 29th.
I'm not available
So
on
we can meet on the
September
29th.
12th or the 26th.
Well, if you're gonna meet on the 5th, that was just in lieu of the 5th. But if you want, well, I don't know, would you rather meet the 29th instead of the 5th?
Makes no difference to me.
Doesn't matter to me.
we already scheduled something for the 5th,
So we want to keep the 5th.
You already scheduled something for the 5th.
for earlier to lead into
So
this
you-
meeting,
Okay.
yeah.
I don't wanna step on my selectmen's report, Gus, but the Affordable Housing Trust is gonna meet on the first Tuesday of the month at 5 o'clock before selectmen's meeting.
Okay.
So
Okay.
the next meeting is September 5th at 5 o'clock.
Okay, so we'll meet on the 5th then.
The 5th, and we'll take those items from the 29th and we'll do those on the 5th.
Yeah.
Because I think those are good things to talk about. And
I
I'll
think-
let the other Affordable Housing Trust members know that any of them who make it can be on our agenda for the 5th, after what is our second meeting, but I'll report on that meeting that everyone's talking about.
Okay, then Dale Street. Is that you, Mike?
Yes, you know, Sarah has had a request from Mr. Kelly, John Kelly, I believe it is, who's with they're now split into two separate projects. One for the westerly side of 27, one for the easterly side of 27. And they've requested to meet with town officials to review their plans. Now, they've met earlier with department heads, and we were quite dissatisfied with the proposals. They said they would go back and review them, and they are now resubmitting their plans. So I thought, we now have an affordable housing trust established since that meeting, and it would be good to have a representative of the Affordable Housing Trust attend the meeting if possible. And B, I think it would be appropriate for us selectmen to attend. Now, if you want to have all three, it's fine, but at least it would be good to have a representative. The reason I bring it up, because it presents a problem if two selectmen go, then it has to be a posted public meeting, which doesn't matter to me, it's just that we have to post it 48 hours in advance. So I assume that Mike would be the representative of the Affordable Housing Trust. You have to decide if you want a selectman to attend, and if so, which one of you?
Well, I guess I would suggest that Mike, you go, and then you can be both a selectman and a Affordable Housing Trust committee member.
That's fine.
And if you could give us dates when you would be available and I'll be available, whichever is shorter list.
How about the 5th at 3 o'clock?
Yeah. Earlier on the 5th, it's fine.
Mike, when you.
Or 11 o'clock.
And I do want to clear one point, that some people think that by meeting with the developer, we're playing into his hands and favoring him. And that's not at all the intent of this. If you don't meet with him, you're
Right.
playing into his hands, because the state regulations require them to contact local officials and meet. If you refuse to meet with them, then it won't look very good when you get to mass housing and say, no, we would meet with them. You're
Well, we
supposed to
can,
cooperate.
we can try to influence the project too, hopefully. You know,
I'm
the issue is gonna be the
not-
number of
yes,
units,
yes.
I assume.
I think there are some people that think we should just wash our hands of it, period, refuse to talk, and I don't think that makes any sense.
No,
I think that
no,
would
No, I think
hurt us a
it
little.
provides an opportunity for us to be more candid than we can.
Yes, yeah.
Mike, when you met with them before, the thing I wrestled with is, we have a housing production plan that says what it is the town wants to do with respect to affordable housing. There's some thoughtfulness that goes into that plan around the idea that you don't want to concentrate all your affordable housing in one. I mean, we have some pretty big complexes, but that's not the ideal circumstance for affordable housing. So we're probably sitting, you know, in round numbers, we need 150 more units of affordable housing by the time we get to 2020. We don't need them now, but if we're planning for 2020, we need 150 units, and I'm going a little above what we need. This is a plan that I guess will bring in 75 out of those, because I don't think the townhouses will all count. But that's not kind of what our housing production plan has, is let's take 50% of what we need and jam it all on 2 lots. So did they get sent back to look at our housing production plan and ask to come back in with a project of a size that would be appropriate, given what that whole plan lays out?
They're aware of the housing production plan. I think their feeling is if the town doesn't meet that housing production plan by May 24th
sure,
of next year,
Yeah,
they can hop in with whatever they choose.
sure.
And I think you notice they cut the plan down from 200 units to 95 units,
Yeah,
which
still 4 stories.
they will say that they have reduced the size of the scale of the project by more than half. So I don't think they care what our housing production plan is,
Right.
unless they can figure out a way to get around it. So- And I think that's probably one of the things we should discuss with them at the meeting. Do they want to try to work with us to do something more in line with the housing production plan?
Mhm.
And whether we can do something along those lines, who knows? I don't think that's their primary interest.
Okay.
So under licenses and permits, we have Medfield Youth Lacrosse Registrar requesting permission to post signs. We have Norfolk Hunt Club requesting a one-day liquor permit. Do we do liquor permits when town council is here? He was saying beer and wine. Do we do liquor as well?
No, it's beer and wine.
Okay. So that should be beer and wine instead of liquor?
I think, hey, Bill, do you remember Gil talking about,
I don't know.
let me see, this is for September, can we defer this one meeting? Because I think I'll see Gil tomorrow. For some reason, it sticks in my mind that Gil said what they wanted to do, I don't know whether it was who's the distiller here in town?
Yeah, Seventh Wave.
I think it's I think their plan was to have Seventh Wave come in for this.
Seventh Wave was
That's a
for
brewery.
Astro Luna is the distillery.
Yeah, so it would be beer.
It'll be beer.
For some reason, it's, yeah,
No,
if we can wait one meeting before we do
Sure,
that.
sure.
Sure.
You'll
I
also,
mean, is there no such thing as a
Just
one-day
for
liquor
some-
permit?
For some reason, it's stuck in my mind that that plan for that particular event, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe it was just beer, but.
Do we do
Well,
liquor
the
permits or is it
next
always beer
meeting
and
would be
wine?
the 5th, though, right?
That would
they
be-
also have a permit for the polo that you granted to them, where they're having this Cool Swan Irish Cream
I
Company.
guess that's the one I'm thinking of.
Right, so
Okay.
they also have a permit for them.
Oh, so as long as that's
That's all
covered,
set.
okay. Okay, that was what was sticking in my
Right.
mind, that they were
Okay.
doing more than beer and wine, but
Yeah.
it sounds like they already got that covered. so,
Exactly.
Okay.
Well, there's two, there's the brewery and the distillery, Astro Luna.
I'm only,
Distillery
I'm
is
only
not
concerned
wine.
with what they were planning to do, and at first I thought you said we only grant beer and wine permits, and it's like,
Yeah.
Well, that was
Sticks in my
that was
mind,
what
they were
town
doing
council
something.
said at our last meeting. So that was just what I was,
too late now, horses out of the barn.
Is that where you were voting them all at once?
no.
No, it's a,
That's
it was
different.
It must have been a meeting I
a,
missed.
it was a, I'll talk to Mark, Mark and I disagree about
Oh,
Well, in that, but
that. And he's not here, so.
in any case, then I guess we can vote on
So
this.
you can pretend you're a
As
lawyer.
Karen.
all right, and then additionally, it's the 20-year anniversary of the Dwight Derby House, Arnold Drive neighbors looking for a block party, so do we have a motion about?
I would move that we approve all of the licenses and permits as requested on the consent agenda.
Second.
Any further discussion, all in favor?
Right.
Town administrator update, Mike?
Have you acted on the action items?
No, he's-
Oh, we have to come back
Oh,
to
you
the
do, you go back.
VHP.
Go left, DPW.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And
You weren't
then
here, so we
signed the
skipped
warrant
the,
also.
We
They
signed the
did
warrant.
that.
Warrants are
Yeah.
signed.
Yeah.
I'm the only
We
one who
skipped
hasn't.
the DPW director, Maurice Goulet, requesting the select
Yeah.
board to sign the engineering company, because you weren't here.
This needs to be acted on tonight because it was put on because the town council was negotiating with the contractor over the terms of the contract and it wasn't resolved till this morning. Basically, it was over the indemnity clause in the contract. Basically, this is for this company to come in and oversee the paving work that's done, to do the testing of the asphalt, to make sure it meets the requirements and standards. And this firm, although they're from Weathersfield, Connecticut, one of the, I think they've been sold, but one of the original principals of this firm lived in Medfield, Mr. Hangen.
Picking,
Yeah, lived up on Farm Street, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah.
They were the original consultant for the hospital planning committee.
And that is a allowable expense under the contract. Incidentally, on the paving is expected, the run is expected to start tomorrow night at 7 p.m. And it will begin, the first night they're gonna start at Brook Street and go from Brook Street, they're gonna try to get to the railroad tracks. So that section will be closed at 7 o'clock and the traffic will be detoured around it.
So Mike, if this contract wasn't firmed up until today, do we need to actually read this before we sign it, or are you?
It's pretty standard, and Mo has worked with this firm before in
Okay.
East Ends, and he said they're very reliable, and my knowledge of the company is they've been around a long time, they're very reliable, so. And it's a limited contract, it's just for a week and a half to oversee the grinding and repaving, so. And town council has already reviewed it and approved it, and made several changes to it.
That was kind of what I wanted to hear, okay. All right.
What, Mike, what's the amount of the contract?
It's in there.
Okay, or whatever.
I'll tell you in a second. $19,000.
Okay.
So I would move that we vote to sign the contract with VHB as requested by Mobile.
Second.
On further discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Yep. And then
And
the town
include the
administrator.
amount in that vote too, probably a bit too late.
Contract for $19,000 with VHB.
Second as amended.
All in favor as amended?
Aye.
Mike, you're on for the update, town administrator update.
I think we've gone over most of the things that will be finished on paving. Paving will start tomorrow night at 7 o'clock, and they can work until 6 in the morning, so they plan to do it overnight. Tomorrow night will be the grinding, and they will grind from starting at Brook Street, and they're gonna try to get down to the railroad tracks. Traffic will be detoured around that, starting at 7 o'clock. The following night, they will do the remaining grinding, which will be from the other side of the railroad tracks, Causeway Street. Now, that's a little more complicated because they go a couple hundred feet down 27 on either side, so the traffic disruption there is going to be a little bit tougher, although that's one of the reasons we're doing it late at nighttime, to minimize the traffic. And we're trying to get it done before school starts too. So they expect to, they don't expect to have to do a leveling course. So it'll be 2 nights with the grinding. And then the paving, they're planning on doing Sunday night and Monday night. Again, starting at 7 o'clock, going till 6 in the morning, and then after that, it's just striping and connecting up on the traffic loops and whatnot. The work on the traffic loops has already started. There will be some work done in the daytime on the raising of the structures, manholes and shut-offs and whatnot, and that will be done by PFG also. So it's going to be,
Is that the paper?
that was the little bidder, yeah, the paving company. And, I'm sure there'll be some concern about it. We've tried to put the signs out, and a couple of people have said, why aren't we telling, what are we hiding? We didn't really have the answers till this morning on that. I didn't know. I was told tentatively they were talking about scheduling on the 16th, but, initially we were told it was gonna be around the 5th, and then they changed the schedule, so we didn't want to go out and say, okay, they're gonna start on the 16th, and find out they're not gonna start till the 18th, or they're gonna start on the 15th, so that's why there was no intent to hide anything from the public. We were trying to be open and transparent, as the saying goes, so.
Oh, come on, Mike.
Love those words.
I prefer not to talk about it. Actually, I have an update item. I had a meeting late this afternoon with 20th Century Fox, and there's a couple things I need to go over with you, because believe it or not, they are getting ready to leave in about a month. And so usually, what's our contract with them, and usually what they do in a situation like this, is they restore the buildings to the condition they found them in. However,
They're trucking a bunch of asbestos and junk.
as Sam Hutchinson told me, this is a kind of a unique situation in that he does not want to return them to the state of disrepair they were in. So their proposal is to remove all the exterior construction. There's been some fountains, there's been some statues, some gates. They will take all of that away. But in terms of interiors, they would like to keep the painted rooms that they did. One of the rooms they did some extensive woodwork, which is beautiful. They would like to keep that for us and not take it down.
They leave the basketball court up?
No, so I'm getting to that. When they leave the buildings, even if they leave the rooms painted and the existing woodwork that they put in, they will seal them all and they will put the hardware back on the windows that we had, the plywood back on the windows. The security fence out front, they took down pieces of that, they will restore that completely. They would like to leave the basketball court where they erected it, if that's okay with everybody, and not move it back to where it was at the R building. And then what they'll start doing is they're gonna stop filming within the next 2 to 3 weeks. As their filming schedule change, we can start to open the campus back up, and we expect by September 15th to be open completely, if not before then. But if it's okay with you, I will give them the go-ahead to start planning the removal and non-removal of the items.
Bill, you know where the basketball court is I'm talking about? Is there any, it's not any problem from the,
Do they leave the razor wire around the top of it, or do they take that?
I'm thinking they take the concrete block out of the middle of it, but.
We did have a public information request for information on contracts and who was negotiating and whatnot, so I was a little bit concerned in that I suggested to Chris that we contact the Mass Film Bureau because this could have a dampening effect on a lot of projects in Massachusetts that bring substantial cash flow into the state, but
I don't think in this particular instance that's the case. This was somebody here in town, it posted on the Concerned Citizen site who would have been far better off just calling the town hall to ask the question that he had, but, my point is,
they
this
don't
was.
believe us.
Huh?
They
Well,
don't believe us.
but my
They
point
are
is.
holding information.
Yeah, my point is that this was somebody who chose not the most productive way to really get his questions answered. It's not a statewide conspiracy to uncover, it was just one of those things. It's unfortunate that people sometimes think that's a smarter thing to do than just picking up the phone.
Well, that's what concerned me, you know, there are an awful lot of films being made in Massachusetts. And if all of these documents are public records and can be released, then the film companies
That's fair,
may think
yeah.
twice about, you know, what documents they sign. So I just thought, at least we ought to let them know prior to releasing it.
That's fair.
I assume in connection with this, Christine, I have no problem with their request, it makes sense to me. And I assume they're otherwise in compliance with the contract, and paying timely and all of that.
Extremely timely.
Yeah, there's no issues from there, so it seems like we should, sounds like it's good for us to have whatever left, whatever's left, sounds like it's working out great.
For anyone that wants to know where the money's going, it's going into the revolving fund that was established at town meeting this year for the hospital, maintenance.
Okay,
So, and all of it will go there.
okay, good.
So, it's unlike some people who think that we're taking a cut. We're not.
But Mike,
And that will alleviate the need to spend money that we appropriated.
It will be used to defray the
To
cost
do
of
that, and so we'll
keeping the
save,
property up.
save money for the taxpayers and that.
Yes.
And I think where they're gonna go into September, I will most likely hold off on bidding the contract for the landscaping until midwinter, because I don't think we're gonna need to do any more mowing for the fall season, and we'll hold off and do for the spring, so that will save us some money as well.
So we effectively would not have spent any landscaping money this year, more or less.
We have spent, they paid for the month of June to
Mhm.
do landscaping, and we did do some cutting in July and August for them.
But not as much as we would have otherwise
No.
if they weren't there.
Are we covered for snow plowing for the winter season?
The DPW does snow plowing for us now,
Okay.
as a cost saving price.
Christine, but
Sure.
do you know if DCAM was able to do the groundwater monitoring testing that they wanted to do?
I've talked to Rebecca, I sent her back an email, and I never heard back from her again, but I have a note to myself to email her again, that they're welcome to come in and do it. They're actually doing filming in the evening right now, so it's no problem to have them come in during the day.
And then the other thing is, if areas of the property become available or open, it would be nice to get DCAM back to look at the access road now and everything else, because they had to hold that off based on the, so if you, as soon as you learn that sited property is available, would you let DCAM know? And John Thompson, me know?
Yep.
Thank
No
you.
problem.
Mike, did you want to let people in town know how much the town's getting for the rental of the property?
I
No,
don't really know,
not at
Chris.
That's the part of the disclosure agreement the non-disclosure agreement that I signed to not release the amount of money that the
Oh,
town was
okay.
receiving at this
Alright.
point. I'm talking to 20th Century Fox that once they have left the site, I should be able to release that with no concern.
Okay. Anything else on town administrator update?
I did have a call concerning, dog droppings and, trash being left behind the, building at the soccer fields down by the Wheelot School, and there was no dumpster there. So I contacted the school department and said, I don't know if it's the school department or the soccer department is responsible for that area, but would you please take care of it, and they're looking into it, so. It was interesting, the gentleman that, wrote said that I said there were 3 types of people that walk dogs down there. The ones that picked up after their dogs and brought it home, the ones that picked up after their dogs and left it at the site, and the vast majority that just leave it there. And that's one of the concerns, it frosts me that we have to pay to pick up dog droppings from these lazy slobs that won't pick it up themselves. And take it home. It's annoying. And the same at the hospital, the same at, Noon Hill, I'm sure has the same issues. And a lot of these people are not from Medfield. And I know when John Thompson came in, when he asked for the $8,000 to pick up dog droppings, he said it would be a 1-year problem, that they would come up with a method of covering the cost without raising it on the property tax.
Just to give you an update, we have not spent any of that money yet because there was an agreement between the Building and Grounds Committee and Park and Rec that we were gonna split the cost of that. And so you gave the authorization to the Building and Grounds to spend $8,000, I believe Park and Rec was gonna spend $8,000. Right after we got that, Park and Rec said they could not spend the $8,000 because it was technically not their property and they could not spend from their revolving fund on property that was not theirs. And then the movie came in, so John and I kind of put that project on hold, so we haven't spent any money on that yet. So we can revisit that if we would like to.
How is it being taken care of? How's it
We're
being
asking
disposed of?
people to pick up after their pets.
Because I had thought that some of them were gonna go at the hospital and the other ones were gonna go at Wheelock.
Right, and Park and Rec was gonna pay for Wheelock and hospital committee was gonna pay for the hospital and then that,
Because Wheelock is school committee, and
right. So Park and Rec couldn't pay for that, and then with the movie coming in, we held off on doing anything up there.
Is that a legal statement from Park and Rec?
Sure.
The reason I ask is because one of the issues I don't think we do well enough here in town is collaborate and effectively use our athletic fields. And so if that's not a legal position,
I believe it is, I believe that, and I believe, if it's not legal, I don't believe the town accountant will let them spend from the revolving fund on property that is. But I will confirm that with her tomorrow.
so this is a broader statement, but if I can picture the future where Park and Rec and the schools need to start collaborating and sharing property in a more effective way, to where some of the things that we're trying to build for individual organizations, we don't need as much of that because we use the things we have more effectively, which says, to the extent that any of this is not nailed down legally, and it's a policy, the time will come that we should be starting to revisit those policies in order to encourage collaboration.
This is actually, we're actually talking about water and sewer property, not the schools. I don't wanna throw them under the bus, 'cause I don't believe we've even talked to them about that, if this was water and sewer property,
oh, the
So,
back.
the back part. So it's something we need to talk about, if water and sewer would like to expend that.
And then there is a certain amount of collaboration. I mean, the school tennis team uses the tennis courts and a comment, and the track team runs their course up through the hospital property.
Right, yeah.
And I think the fields guy from Parks and Rec has been working on the school field as well.
Yes.
Playing school
Okay.
fields,
Oh,
so-
good.
Okay. No, was that not
I
true?
don't know,
That was a rumor? That was just a rumor?
I need to check on that.
Okay.
But he's not walking his dog up there.
I mean, there have been times when Park and Rec and the school committee were charging each other for the use of facilities, so
Mhm.
that there was not a total cooperation. between the two of them.
And I think they're in a much better state of cooperation than.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, well, that was what I was picking
Yes,
up on.
no, I think
All
they're,
right. Okay,
Yeah,
good.
that was fairly short term, yeah.
yeah. I think there's a problem for everybody, as Mike mentioned, about picking up other people's dog food. So it's really just pick it up and take it home and get rid of it.
I mean, the problem is the solution for it sounds, I mean, other than changing the behavior of people, which seems unlikely, the solution for it is to start writing people tickets and enforcing
Yes.
tickets for it, and,
Yeah.
you know, go and doing it that way. And write enough tickets, then people will realize that, okay, they're gonna write me tickets. Then, of course, what you have is you're saying to police officers, okay, police officers, you're gonna great training, at the police academy, now you're gonna go stake out, you know, the dog walking trail behind Wheelock to it, but.
Or you put a fee on dog walking, you know, like in Rocky Woods, you can walk your dog, but you have to kind of register the dog in order to walk the dog. You put on a fee on dog walking, and the fee is set at whatever it costs to get the places that people are walking the dogs cleaned up. So if people are responsible, the fee is virtually nothing.
You still have to enforce that. Right now, the real problem up there is the guys that pull up with 5 dogs in the car, the
Yeah.
professional dog walkers that aren't from Medfield.
Yeah.
The majority of people up there aren't from Medfield. So how do you enforce, either, whatever you do, you have to spend police time to at least,
Yeah.
you know, get the public trained.
So one of the things that I see is, my office is in Newton, so I often see what Newton is doing on things, and I was at Newton City Hall, and in the city clerk's office, they had affidavit forms that related to dogs. And so I pulled all of those and emailed them to John Thompson, and said, you know, here's how you might charge for the out-of-town dog
Yeah.
walkers.
I mean, I don't know that we need more licenses and bureaucracy and permits.
You need the money to
Yeah.
make it
I
work.
think if you made the fines high enough and you enforce the fines
I don't think
a
we have,
few
I
times,
don't think we have a bylaw to.
well, then that's what we should have, a bylaw, and
Yeah, I
enforce the
agree.
fines against
I
the
mean, I
people.
thought that committee was
You
gonna
need
come back
a
with
special town
recommendations
meeting.
about.
I think the police chief has spoken about this a few times at the building and grounds committee, and the issue is even if they issue the fines and the people ignore them, the courts don't want to take up an issue such as this, so then they don't enforce it either. And so, you know, even though we try to enforce it, it then goes beyond us and it's not enforced, so.
Under the municipal reform act, wasn't there something that if you can identify the individual with the property in town, well, that would only apply to people who live in Medfield, you couldn't send a lien to another town if they were from another town. So it is a problem if the courts won't enforce.
It's not just the town either. DCR has a regulation that says no more than 4 dogs, you know, with any individual owner, and they all have to be under the owner's control. I mean, and nobody's enforcing that. I mean, certainly DCR isn't gonna be up at the hospital looking at who's walking on the river trail.
I know that John's committee he has the separate dog walking committee, and they've been trying to come up with regulations that they're proposing at the 2018 town meeting. So.
Good.
I think with all the cell phone cameras these days, it would be easy to catch people in the act and get their license and plate numbers and reward them for
Then what?
littering, so nothing else.
Public stocks.
Public shaming.
Yeah, probably shame.
Deliver the poop to their house.
My mother used to do that.
Okay, that is one job I'm gonna say, no, I'm not doing.
One kid lived 2 doors down, and the dog would, right, she'd grab it and go, "Oh, Johnny!" Solve the problem.
Put it right on the front door stoop.
In the burning bag, I guess is the.
Yep.
Next is approval of the minutes from April 4, May 4, and May 23. Mike had one change. On May 4, Evelyn, it was, in my report, it was the Medfield Coalition, MCAP, Medfield Cares About Protection, instead of MCPE, that was related to Dr. Cote. They were involved in bringing her MCAP.
And I have 2 corrections, and Evelyn, I will give you what I wrote so you can see it here. But this was, matters of fact, April 4th, the minutes read that I had, this had to do with the rail trail conversation we had. The way it was written up was that I had said I had attended their committee meetings. It was actually they who had attended the ward committee meetings. And the thing that wasn't picked up in here was my concern had to do with the indemnification of the state for past, present, and future environmental. So I've got the words for you here, that's for that one. And then on May 4th, in regard to the communications policies, I didn't make the case that the subject should be discussed at a meeting so that each member has the opportunity to give his opinion. The issue was when the communication comes into the Board of all three selectmen, I was suggesting that one selectman should respond in advance of the meeting. So I reworded it, a response on behalf of the board. You all didn't go along with this, so this didn't happen, but this is what I said. A response on behalf of the Board of Selectmen should be coordinated if something is sent out prior to the next PLS meeting. So those, they're just matters of record.
And when I sent you my correction, just that we've authorized Christine.
It's only authorizing Christine, I thought it was both Michael and Christine.
Sure, Michael and Christine, that's fine.
That's what it read.
Oh, it did read that? I thought so we discussed it.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what you're referring to. Is it the dog poop? Because I said no.
Well, maybe I misread it.
Motion made and seconded. Selectmen voted unanimously to approve
I
town
think it was just
administrator and
Oh,
assistant town
okay. It
administrator.
was just different, okay.
So is that okay?
Oh, that's fine. Yeah, no, I read the section and it just,
Negotiate a contract?
no, I must have not read that portion of it.
Okay.
Because I read the section, it just had the description, it didn't have any action on it, under 20th Century Fox.
Okay, selectmen's reports.
So I would move that we accept the minutes as
Oh, yes,
corrections from Pete.
Is there a
Gus,
second?
not from me.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Yep. Mike, you want to do a report?
Sure, so I'll report on the first meeting of the Board of Trustees of the Affordable Housing Trust, which took place earlier this month. I was elected chairman of the board, unopposed for that. And we went through the list of the potential affordable housing projects that are going on in town that could contribute towards the 21 units we need to get to extend our safe harbor certification starting today. And so we have more than probably 180 units kind of under discussion. And so you don't need a huge batting average on those to come to the 21 we need for the year. So at least as of August 2017, we have a pool to work with. And what we've done, we've agreed to meet the first Tuesday of every month. And we've taken all of those projects and assigned a member of the board to kind of be responsible for each of those projects. So in between meetings, the members of the board who are assigned to the particular projects are going to meet with the developer, meet with the other people who are involved, and begin to map out sort of a budget and a plan for the kind of assistance that might be needed to help move those projects along. I think the one that's most advanced is the project next door to the Cushman House project. That seems to be moving ahead pretty quickly with the same developer. And so hopefully we'll keep the momentum going on that. That would be an 8-unit, almost carbon copy of what's going to be at the Cushman House. Otherwise, we do have some good candidates. There's I think a substantial amount of progress being made. It sounds like until the village, it sounds like we might have turned a little bit of a corner there in terms of actually making progress. And they have negotiated a deal with the developer to expand expand that development. And so everyone will report back on the 5th, but I think we're in okay shape. We need to keep pressing on it and not be complacent about it, but there's certainly enough opportunities out there to extend the safe harbor that we have and kind of continue to make progress towards the 10%. We've got, as we know, a very talented group of people who agreed to be part of that board, and it seems like everyone's started getting work done to move those projects along. So it was an encouraging first meeting, and looking forward to the next one. We did, in deference to my schedule, we agreed to meet at 5 o'clock on the first Tuesdays, because I know that I'm always in Medfield on the first Tuesday of the month. So that will work out, I think, for everybody. So.
And was there any discussion about whether it would be useful to the group to have an employee I know that there's a half-time employee down in Easton who's supposed to be very good.
We didn't get that far. I mean, so we got more in the standpoint of, let's start to look at what we're gonna need to do. I think Roberta from Community Opportunities Group, she was there, she's gonna put together and send us some stuff that they have used in Easton, some different guidelines, and kind of different process things that they put into place for there. So we haven't gotten to the detailed level of potentially needing another, half-time employee or whatever to work on this. I think as we get to understand what the needs are for each of the projects that are under consideration, then we'll kind of understand what resources the trust will need to put towards promoting.
Roberta
these
was the one
projects.
who said at the meeting that if we hired an employee, it would be cheaper than using her.
In the short term.
Yep.
In the short term.
In the
although-
short term, right.
And the good thing about consultants is their contracts end, and there's an expectation that then they're not going to stay on. One of the challenges are with employees, that's not always the expectation that you necessarily no longer have a job when your services aren't being used. So, but we didn't get to that level today.
Okay.
Mike, this is probably not on your radar screen yet, but has your committee gotten the draft senior housing committee study? I meant to send you an email. I talked to Tony Santori, it was last week, and I had been pushing him to get that thing out because there's some information in there that ought to be driving a lot of what's going on with senior housing. He's been, understandably, he's reluctant to put out a final because as soon as he does, everybody want to change. So, but what he said was he didn't have any problem at all with your committee I'm assuming your committee picks up the responsibilities for both the Affordable Housing Committee and the Senior Housing Committee in the, as this unfolds. But he was comfortable having you guys get the draft Senior Housing Committee report. It's not critical for affordable housing questions unless you're doing senior/affordable housing questions. But,
Is this different than the report that they made to us earlier this year?
that's the report I'm talking about.
Oh, and they've already publicly discussed that. Is it the same one that they came to the meeting and they explained what they wanted and?
I don't know. It's the one that Mike distributed a month and a half ago. So it's still a draft report. It's a good report.
Yeah, that was right around town meeting.
And it would have been around early June, maybe?
Yeah, the
Maybe
meeting was
later.
way before that, they presented here in public meeting,
Yeah, that's what
and
I'm.
I saw that, it was here.
I'm talking about, there was a report that you had distributed to us. I can check, it's on the agenda, but it was probably early June, maybe late May. It's the most recent draft,
So it's an update of the one that was,
probably.
that he reported on when he came here.
So
I mean, no, we didn't,
Okay.
we didn't. I mean, from the standpoint, the Affordable Housing Committee is gonna remain in place in the advisory role that they've had. I think the only piece of the Senior Housing Study Committee we pick up would be the affordable component of it.
So the charter of the Affordable Housing Trust is affordable and community housing.
Yeah.
Okay. But you anticipate those two other committees will still,
No, the Senior Housing Study Committee is a study committee, and so I
Okay.
assume when they issue their report, they're done. And so to the extent there's gonna be any development that the Affordable Housing Trust is going to do within its charter that would fit within the categories that the study committee has identified, that would fall within the bylaws of the Affordable Housing Trust. I don't think we're gonna pick up any of the studying aspect, and the Senior Study Committee has a specific charter to study this, issue a report, and then that's kind of the end of it. And so, I don't think we're picking any of the study aspects of it. We may pick up the active aspect to the extent that any of the types of developments that report has identified as a need in Medfield, to the extent it falls within what the trust does, we pick that, sort of the active aspect of it, the development aspect of it.
so this is fine, but help me understand what the Affordable Housing Committee, this is a question among us, because I would have assumed something different. What is the role of the affordable housing? Now that there's a housing production plan, now that there's zoning regulations in to ensure that there's a maintenance of 10%, what's the role of the Affordable Housing Committee versus the role of the Affordable Housing
I
Trust?
think as it was described to us, as it's sort of advisory, policy oriented, and that sort of thing. They did elect a member of the Affordable Housing Committee, has a seat on the Affordable Housing Trust. And so I think they would remain, they review, I mean, they were the committee that was responsible for the housing production plan itself, and they review proposed affordable. I imagine they'll be offering opinions on developments the Affordable Housing Trust is putting forward and all of that, or whatever they would normally be doing. This is sort of an additional, the trust is sort of taking on a more active role in promoting specific projects and financing and developing specific projects, or providing assistance to the development of specific projects.
I think it's a little belt and suspenders in our affordable housing. But most towns that have done the affordable housing trust have kept their affordable housing committee as well.
And so the trust really is just a project management office.
It could be that if they came up with a project that the town might be involved in, such as Allendale, that they would be a logical candidate to try to carry that out. Although that was a community development corporation we set up to do that. But it was basically the same as the Affordable Housing Committee.
I mean, we may end up still using the Community Development Corporation for some of those projects through the trust, and the trust might make contributions to the CDC.
Now, is the Community Development Corporation, I understand they're gonna turn the money over to the trust?
Yes.
Okay.
But we may end up, depending on the nature of the project, it may be that we end up sending money back to them to do the project. Because there's advantages to doing it through the CDC as opposed to the town doing it.
They may be quicker to act than the committee, than the affordable housing trust can, so.
Yeah. Well, that'll be good too, it'll give you some seed money, so you might not have to go out and borrow the $1 million as quickly as you might otherwise if you didn't have any seed money to work with.
Very true.
Anything else to report on? Gus?
Not much. I don't know that you would have brought this up. I only happened to, this was a follow-on to the garden club request and the reflection I had on people. No, I'm not bringing up garden club issues. It was,
You'll get
that
those
one-
minutes next year.
that one, I won't remember what happened.
Yes, you
Boosted our ratings.
My only point was that the garden club request, and the garden club request caused me to step back and think a little bit about the people in town and the organizations in town that do things just to make Medfield a better place. And in some ways, even though you know they all exist, whether it's the Little Mason House folks or Dwight Derby House or whatever, there are people who labor on these things for years, and they do it so long and so quietly, you almost take it for granted. So Patch had an article, this goes back a couple of weeks because I missed a meeting, about the Vine Lake Preservation Trust getting an Oakley Award. So just wanted to acknowledge the award, thank them for all the work they've done all along. We've got one of the most beautiful cemeteries that I bet you any town the state of Massachusetts has, and a lot of it has to do with the Vine Lake Preservation Trust. So
They are
just a
remarkable.
tip of the hat. That's all I got.
Okay, anything from the ALS?
We're meeting Thursday night, so we're kind of chugging along. Brewster Ambulance is gonna come in on Thursday night. So there's a number of different fronts that we're trying to work this on, but one of them is to understand how the commercial ambulance part of the, option, how they actually work, how they think about business, how you could get things if you needed to do that. We're also looking at the other options around alternatives for staffing, and there's a few alternatives for staffing that give you short-term relief, but ultimately get you to a full-blown staff. So you kind of have to recognize those alternatives are simply implementation alternatives. You're on a path that gets to a full-blown staff. So that we're kind of pursuing that thread, and we're also trying to reach out to different towns and orchestrate that in a way. I assume you've reached out to the towns, so they know. We'll be talking, trying to get a sense of what the appetite might be to collaborate.
Good, thank you. The one thing that I would report on is I had someone ask me about speed limits in town. And ever since the Municipal Modernization Act, we've had the authority to change speed limits in town. I think it would be a good exercise for us
Well,
to.
we talked about that when Maurice was here, you only have the authority on certain roads. Let me look that back up again. It doesn't give you the authority on all of the streets. Let me
Okay.
look that up and
Yeah.
I'll give you the full
Yeah,
citation.
because I think that'd be a good exercise for us to go through and figure out where we have speed limits that we might want to change.
We can give you a printout of what all the existing speed limits are, because we had a student here about 4 years ago, Jared Nolan, who went through all the traffic rules and orders and came up with all the speed limits, the stop signs, the parking restrictions. And I wanted to rescind the traffic rules and orders and revoke them all in one consistent document. And, you know, you don't think that's important until there's an accident. And we've had people try to claim that our stop sign was faded to a pink instead of a red, and therefore they should be held responsible for the accident. And other things like that, that's not the only one. So I thought, well, you know, they've been adopted over a period of 50 years, and if we could just rescind them all and vote them all at once, it would be much easier to document what we've done. And I was advised by town council that in order to do that, you would have to advertise the entire thing, and it probably cost us around $10,000. We tried, and under the Municipal Modernization Act, and I give the governor credit, he did put a provision in that would have allowed us to put that on our website, so that we wouldn't have to pay for the advertising cost. And gee, surprisingly, you got deleted in the legislature. So now we'd still have to go out and advertise, and what was it, we had to pay for 2 employment ads that we recently advertised for. We put them in the MMA bulletin, and I think it was under $200. We had to publish them in the local newspaper, and it was for the same 2 ads, $2,000.
So is that when you do a mass rescission, or is that if you wanted to change one speed limit?
If you wanted to change one, you'd have to put the ad in, you know, you'd have to put the ad in.
So
But
that's
the cost is
10,000.
because you didn't publish the whole thing.
Because the length, you have to list all the stop signs, all the traffic limits, and parking restrictions. I'll try to dig it out, print it out for you so you can
I
see
mean,
it.
the issue on the speed limits is enforcement, right? And the perfect example of that is Hartford Street in Westwood, right? Hartford Street in Westwood is a 30-mile-per-hour speed limit. The road is crying out to drive 50 miles an hour on it, but there is 80% of the time there's a Westwood police officer there. And so anybody who regularly drives on Hartford Street in Westwood knows if you're going over 35 miles an hour, you're gonna get a ticket. Right, and so if you drive on that street, you look at it, it looks like a street that people would fly down. Generally, people don't, because if you drive there enough, there is so much enforcement on that street, because it's an obvious cutoff from 109. And so, I mean, I think the only thing for people who are concerned about speeding is to have increased enforcement and have the idea that if people get to, okay, give out enough tickets for speeding in different spots that are problem spots, people will learn to slow down because they'll see people pulled over there all the time. But it's, you know, logistically, I mean, one of the things that makes Hartford Street and Westwood amenable to that is that there's lots of places for the police cars to hide, and very few ways for the cars to get away, right? So it's also conducive to nailing people for speeding, because you can just sneak over on the side, you go get them, and you're done, right? In those spots. And then there's those logistical questions, which obviously the chief would have to work out. But I mean, to me, as many of these rules, the only way you get people to follow them is to make it more expensive to disobey them than to obey them. And so we could change the speed limits, but I don't think dropping the speed limits is going to make any difference at all. If you ask most of the people what the speed limit is on any of these roads, they don't really have no idea.
And here on Hartford Street, I thought it was the deer that held the speed down, because you never know when they're going to jump out in front of your car.
No, and you will see people, when it shifts from Harvard Street and Westwood to Medfield, they will speed up. So you get through the end of Westwood, there's a stop sign there, and you're heading into Medfield, and the sides are very narrow, and then people will rip right out of that stop sign, because you're sort of you're in the clear after you get from the end of that one section. And I'm sure there was enough complaints from people on that street, as people would come up, they would try to avoid 109 and zip down Hartford Street, they're there all the time.
Although I have seen the police cruiser on Draper Avenue once or twice.
Where's that?
That's the last street before you come into Medfield on the left. Once you go through that stop sign on Hartford Street.
That's Dover, I think, in that.
It is Dover, yes, that's
Yeah.
that's Dover, yeah. So
Well, you
they-
see a Dover police car in that spot.
Yeah.
So just to clarify, it does allow you to establish a 25-mile-per-hour speed limit if it's an area that has been deemed thickly settled or in your business district. also do the creation of designated safety zones, but you need approval of Mass DOT to set up a safety zone. If you set up a safety zone, you can go as low as 20 miles an hour.
So I think that would be a good exercise for the chief to look at the town and see whether we have the right speed limits. I mean, I know I've heard him say that he doesn't like the fact that there's a 40-mile-an-hour speed limit that starts at the Baptist Church on Route 109 out front here.
That we have no control over because it's a state highway. Right.
No, we have no state highways.
Okay.
It's just we haven't,
It's a state
we
number
haven't
road.
gotten around to it, yeah. In fact, we brought that up in a safety meeting a couple of years ago, and the chief swore it was not 40 miles an hour. I said, I'm pretty sure it is.
I'll talk to him about it. I have a meeting with him tomorrow. I'll bring it up.
Oh, yeah, they'll be embarrassed about that one.
I won't bring that up. I'll bring up the speed limit issue.
Um,
Anything on the informational items?
No.
Okay, then we're done.
I move adjournment.
Second.
So,